Welcome to Rebellion Health. I'm excited to be here. This is, we're going to talk about some really cool, like up and coming, forefront, forging the way type information today. I'm super excited about that. It's one thing to be able to talk about, kind of some of the things that we know, we've heard, we know, we got a little bit of information about, but something that's forging the way for women that's incredible. So Laura, give me all the deets and let's hear who we're talking to.
Let's get rolling. So Rebellion Health is all about being forward thinking, rebelling against our norms, rebelling against the system, going against just normal aging and being more proactive with our health. And so I cannot think of a better way to start out 2026 than with our guest, Kiran Kumar. Did I say your last name correctly, Kiran?
Yes.
Okay. Kiran is the CEO and founder of Timeless Biotech, and she has developed some technology that merges AI with some medical information. So I'm going to let her tell us all about that. But the topic of today's podcast is going to be around ovarian and longevity and how we can merge those two. And so we don't have to just age and say, it's time for menopause, or it's coming regardless. We have some proactive control that we can maybe even take upon ourselves to implement in our lives. And so, Kiran, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your software and what you've developed. And then I'm going to play a little game of true and false to see if I can get our listeners engaged, to see if, we can kind of like put to rest some myths that we all hold about the way that we age. So I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, I'm the CEO and founder of Timeless Biotech. I'm a biotechnology bioengineer. So that's where that knowledge of physiology and bioinformatics comes from. I've also worked on machine learning driven diagnostics in the past, and I've spent a lot of time in the longevity space working with brands like Timeline, OneSkin, and even Eli Health. And what I came to the conclusion of, which many people in the space do, is that if there's one missing piece of every single woman's health puzzle, it's the ovary. So we know the ovary is well recognized as virtually a vital sign for fertility, for longevity, for metabolic health, cardiovascular health, brain health, bone health, you name it. But we've never had a good biomarker for it. And that's really, really led to a lot of subjectivity when talking about things like hormone imbalance, hormonal conditions, and eventually the end of that ovarian lifespan where we start to experience perimenopausal symptoms and eventually that final menstrual period. So that led to us focusing on finding a way to measure that missing piece of the puzzle. And that was how we developed the first and only ovarian age clock and time to menopause predictor. So like you said, MenoTime, it's machine learning driven. It's a very sophisticated model that analyzes blood work doctors are already running, so AMH, FSH, and estradiol, in order to produce a predicted age of menopause, estimated ovarian age with 95% confidence intervals, along with unique, actionable recommendations of what you can do to move the needle.
Wow, let's dig into that a little bit. But I'm going to first start with some true or false, and Mandy, you can play along too.
Okay. I'm always trying to fight aging.
This always just kind of breaks the ice, gets our listeners engaged. And if you want the answers to this, keep listening. So, true or false, Kiran, my biological clock is ticking, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Well, that's an easy one. False.
I know, right? And I'm excited to hear what we can do about it. I can rely on current biohacking strategies because they have been widely tested in women.
I'd say false.
Yes. And I want to hear more about that as we go along. Because I'm healthy, I expect that menopause will not really affect my overall health.
I'd say false once again. I'm sensing a pattern here.
Yeah, I see a pattern. And then my doctor says my labs are normal, so there is no way I could be in perimenopause.
Ooh, I'd say false to this one as well.
Yeah. I'd say you answered all those pretty accurately based on what we know and what you've developed. So let's dig into a little bit around just the idea of the ovary being our pacemaker of health. You know, we've heard it referred to as that, and just that vital sign for women. What exactly does that mean as we age, that the ovary is a vital sign?
Yeah, so it's something that we've become more comfortable calling it based on how menopause impacts all these different facets of health. That's where the research really it's centered on. And a big part of that, and I like to talk about this specific study that focuses on biological age acceleration. And the reason for that is the whole point of a biological age clock is to catch things before they happen. It's all about being proactive. That's the whole point of longevity medicine, is you're capturing the primary fundamental hallmarks of aging with this test. And what they found is that in just the 6 months following the menopausal transition, there was nearly a decade of accelerated biological aging. That's a very visceral response from something, that's supposed to be a primary hallmark. And it's really because when it comes to women, that number one ticking clock is the ovary. The hormones that are produced, ovulatory hormones, are so fundamental to virtually every organ system of our body that the fact that they're getting ignored or not well represented in biological clocks, in cardiovascular disease risk assessments, metabolic disease risk assessments, all of these different clinical decision support tools, is way too detrimental, because we've seen how risks double and go through the roof during this transition, which, by the way, in that study, which identified that decade of accelerated aging, was completely prevented with estrogen therapy.
Wow.
So we're talking about a preventable decade of acceleration in biological aging that we're not able to prevent because we don't know when this transition's coming.
We panic every time we go from 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50. You have that birthday and you're like, whoa. You know, and you're thinking, okay, now what's fixing to go sideways right here? If you're telling me that when my ovaries decide to, camp out and stop working and take a summer off, then I'm going to accelerate 10 more, that makes me heat up, and that might be a flash. I don't know.
And I think a big part of it is like what you described. We see those chronological numbers. Aging, a fear of aging exists in the world right now, and especially in the female population. It's been ingrained in us. So that's not what biological age and longevity interventions are introducing. It's for once now introducing a semblance of control. The fact that it's not just a ticking chronological age clock, like you mentioned in that true or false question. There are things we can do, like that decade of accelerated aging. If I told you that's completely preventable with estrogen therapy, wouldn't you have follow-up questions?
100%. Yes. And I do have questions. More. So right now, what we have to predict and look at as clinicians is, FSH, LH, estradiol, progesterone. We also use testosterone, to look at where someone is in that journey. So your test uses the estradiol, the FSH, and the AMH. So what do you feel like is the advantage of using your MenoTime? I'll go ahead and say the name. We haven't even said the name, but MenoTime, to predict that versus what we currently have. What are the drawbacks for using what we have?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's been a huge, and I can see why, we all know why, but there's been a huge push away from testing blood in the women's health space because there's so much variation within the cycle and from one individual to the next. And because of that, we work off of typically symptoms for identifying if a woman's in perimenopause or experiencing hormone imbalances. And I was at the Menopause Society annual meeting, and they were changing some of the first few symptoms you should be looking for. And some of the ones they mentioned were getting 1 less hour of sleep.
Which happens all the time, right?
Which I got last night.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think I did too. Yeah.
Yeah. Or if you got a newborn.
Yeah. Or a dog.
Yeah, so exactly. Let's say you're postpartum. Let's say you're going through a difficult, stressful time in your life. let's say you just generally are an insomniac. These signals that we use are too generic for us to be able to really successfully capture things in a very fast moving, time sensitive period of our lives. So, it's unfortunate that we've had to move to symptom-only information when blood work can still give us a lot of value. The issues remain that like a one-time blood test has a lot of variability from one person to the next. So how do you like look at this one static value and derive anything? That's where machine learning comes in.
Yes.
So yeah, our model runs 100,000 conditional pathways per patient and over 1 billion mathematical operations to train.
Wow.
So it's looking at a lot more than we could possibly identify with the naked eye. And when that analysis is run, we realized that while the model does use some symptom information, it's not nearly as predictive as blood. But blood values alone are not what's driving the prediction. It's the full picture, the combination of those values and the interaction terms, as we call them, that are really showing highest predictive performance and allowing us to provide this like robust, accurate, reliable prediction.
Wow.
So for those who are not clinical, like myself, can you explain what you're testing? Like you're saying FSH, and so for those who aren't clinical, can you kind of give a I don't want to say elementary explanation around what you're testing and what it's telling you?
Yes, so selecting the markers was really important to us because we wanted to make sure these were things that doctors were already testing, but also variables that were directly interfacing with the process of ovulation. Okay. So that's why we selected AMH, which is a very commonly used test for ovarian reserve. Out of all of the hormone markers we've researched, we find that it has the best trending data because it doesn't vary as much as some of the other hormones from one individual to the next or through the cycle, but it still has its issues. So that's why we selected AMH, because that's typically the marker that we find in literature is best for ovarian reserve.
Okay.
Then you have FSH, which is a follicle stimulating hormone, and it does just that. It's a signaling hormone that basically is it's a hormone that is your brain communicating to your ovaries that you need to release an egg. And it gets harder and harder as we get fewer and fewer eggs for us to do that. So the follicle stimulating hormone goes higher and higher as our ovaries age and as we age, because it requires more signaling to get the same effect. So that's a hormone that's directly involved in the process of ovulation. And then you have estradiol. You're ovulating, are you producing the ovulatory hormones? So you're talking about these three different elements. One's focused on the ovarian reserve as a whole. The other's focused on signaling to the ovaries, that connection, what we call the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis, right? And then you're talking about are you producing adequate levels of these ovulatory hormones that have these beneficial effects on the body? So that was the hypothesis we went in with. We tested a bunch of other hormones too in our initial model, but we found that these, like we had believed they would be, were the most predictive. So hormones like inhibin B didn't perform as well. LH didn't rank as highly, which was surprising. Testosterone didn't rank as high. DHEA didn't rank as high. So these were the ones that we boiled down to.
So I know we're talking about menopause and being able to tell when your ovaries are depleting, and I may be using the wrong words and you're allowed to correct me. But would this be something that someone who's been struggling to get pregnant or that have waited to have a family until a later age, would these tests be something that would be conducive to someone like that to test and say, okay, where am I? Is this a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So currently, if you're, let's say, in your mid-30s and you're looking to conceive, a big thing that people will go off of is your age, your chronological age. And in some cases, they'll do an AMH test to identify, in many cases, if you have a high success rate, if you'll have a high success rate of IVF, Those are typically where lots of those tests come from when you're already at that stage. Very few conversations surrounding natural conception for people who are looking to consider that option at that age. And a big reason for that is because we have that mindset that chronological age supersedes any lifestyle differences we could make, any interventions we could use, and even like other therapeutic protocols that could potentially be developed. So a big part of this tool is both for clinical usage and for usage in research. I'll start with research because that's always what likes to come first and should come first. There's been a limitation, the amount of interventional data we've been able to develop in this space. And the reason for that is there's never been what we call a surrogate endpoint. So I'll give you an example. If I want to identify if my therapeutic intervention, my drug, is delaying your age of menopause and prolonging your fertile years, I have to wait for you to go through menopause to identify when you went through menopause. And I can't now turn the clock back and give you the drug and see when you go through menopause.
Right.
I can observe if people on the drug went through menopause earlier or later, but it takes a long time, and that's not the same quality of data because it's observation. It's not intervention. That's where our tool comes in. You test the person's ovarian age at baseline, you give them the intervention, you test them again, and now you actually know if that intervention could move the needle and delay menopause or prolong fertile years in this individual. So that's the research element. And now this, obviously, you can imagine would have profound effects in fertility, where you can see where you stand personally, work off your ovarian age, potentially instead of your chronological age, and then work on interventions to maybe even slow aging or return back the clock.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because when I looked at your tool and looked at some of the examples, I think it was your own data that was shown as an example, which was very brave of you to share with the world. It looked at some specific areas, like one being around like insulin resistance, I believe, one being around like AMH quality, and then it identified some ways that you could intervene. So on that, those 4 areas, can you kind of briefly touch on that? So once you've had your labs submitted and you've submitted your personal data and the test has been run, how are they, or what are they recommending based on those 4 areas?
Yeah, so like you said, in that report, what you see is obviously the hormones that we discussed, right? Those specific variables. How can you modify those variables? What are flagging things for you? Some self-report information. What's your sexual health burden, right? Things like waist hip circumference, metabolic health. How can we target those things? So those are big in the recommendations. And with our recommendations, we link those to clinically validated interventions for each focus area that we pull out as a target, so that you can actually start that process of tracking and hacking your ovarian age. With regards to things like insulin resistance, metabolic health, like some of those more blood-based tests, that's actually step 2. So we're already working on like a more robust model that now says, okay, we have this missing piece of the puzzle for all of these different risk factors like cardiovascular disease and metabolic, like issues with metabolic health. We see a rising instance of type 2 diabetes in the female population, like all of these different areas. And now how can we use this as something that we can now use in addition to these typical biomarkers for all of these areas to build a comprehensive assessment for women specifically?
That's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it really does give us valuable information about how we can impact our health on this side of menopause. You know, in our clinic, we see a lot of women that they want to know, am I in perimenopause? And, you know, and a lot of times we just don't see that on labs right away. We hear it in the symptoms, you know, we hear it in their stories. But when we as clinicians look at the labs, it's not a black and white picture all the time, depending on when we tested that lab value. So to have something that could measure that age and predict within, I believe it was within 2 years of your menopause date. Is that correct, Kiran?
That's with no horizon. So that's for all of, it gets more and more accurate the closer you get to your final menstrual period.
Okay. So to have that data and then be given clinically based information on how we can intervene to perhaps even prolong that with certain supplements, certain hormone therapy, red light therapy, hyperbaric oxygen. I think it gives us such implication for the future on even how we can intervene with other therapies like peptides, stem cells, or whatever, the case may be. And then we can measure that like you're discussing, and intervene earlier so that we know what works for that person. And do we see it change from person to person, or is there a trend that we're seeing in those earlier years?
Is there a starting age? Like, do we pull out, the baby's born and it's a girl and we're like, get that baseline, or or is it like, you're in your 20s and you've gone past puberty? I don't know. Where's the baseline? What age is that?
We say mid-20s.
Yeah. Okay.
Mid-20s is when you can start the process. And that's also when we find people start to really complain about things with hormone imbalance. They're like, I have all these symptoms. I'm going into my doctor and my values are always completely clear. But they typically present in a specific way. So that's why we say mid-20s is when you're really going to start to see the value add. And that's also when things will you want to be more, you want to start educating yourself about the ovarian aging and how you can sometimes uniquely do things in a different way than we sometimes recommend, which can be detrimental to the ovary, especially when it comes to certain biohacking techniques.
Yeah, can you tell a little bit about that? I heard you talk about some of the biohacking techniques actually had been studied on men. And so then when we apply those to women, we don't always get the same outcome. Can you give a little background on that?
Yeah, it's one of our favorite things to talk about in the longevity space, because a lot of things that we do in longevity is focus on hormesis, which is healthy stress, right? And it's supposed to activate specific longevity pathways through things like doing a cold plunge or certain fasting techniques. And it's not to say that these things are bad for women. There are many cases the data is actually positive with women. The issue is that the data we collect on women as well is not taking into account ovarian health because we haven't had tools to assess that. But when we look at the anecdotal experiences, we hear about women who stop menstruating. They stop getting their period because they are in a significant calorie deficit, right? Or when they do too much cardio on their period, their period stops, or they measure and they realize they're having anovulatory cycles, which is when you're bleeding, you're having your bleed, but it turns out you weren't ovulating and producing those key ovulation hormones that are so important for our health. And many of these women, once again, when we speak to physicians, we see typically some of them trend towards things like POI. And you take, which is an early menopause, clinically early menopause. And when you take a follicle count, you actually do a pelvic ultrasound of some of these women that are going through perimenopause, very young, entering this very early menopause, you see that they don't have very few follicles sometimes. They actually have a normal number of eggs for that age, but it's completely the hormone imbalance that is leading to that situation. So that's why when we talk about biohacking, the reason I'd be wary of certain things is because we have that anecdotal evidence that shows that some women have experienced things that are associated with poor ovarian health from intense practices. But there are ways to track to make sure that you're not going down that path. If fasting is working for you, you should do it. Maybe you should do it at certain times. Maybe you shouldn't do it at certain times. Maybe you should make sure you're eating enough healthy fats. Maybe there's a supplement that can help you and make sure you're ovulating. So it's just a delicate balance because the data we have, even when on women, is not necessarily taking into account any ovarian biomarkers.
Listen, I am of an age that if I'm going to take your test, I am praying you're coming back and being like, them things have camped out. They're on permanent vacation. And if you were to come back to me and be like, oh, Mandy, they're active, I'd be like, huh? What?
That's where I personally sit. Right. And I mean, it gives us so much data around how we can improve our health on this side of menopause. We work in our practice with lots of perimenopausal women that want to know, what can I do to prolong this time of my life? And then some don't. Some want to get through it and be done. And I'm like, no, I promise you don't, because your ovaries are producing those really great endogenous, from yourself, own healthy hormones that are supporting your overall health. So when we think about, there was another question I had that was very interesting. I heard you talk about what is our first marker of perimenopause? Because in our clinic, we hear, I wake up at 3 a.m., I wake up at 2 a.m. And that is a key little clue for us clinicians that, hey, you might be starting down that path. But when you all measured hormones, there was one that I heard you speak about. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And I think the reason it's such an early symptom that women experience is because the first hormone, to our knowledge, all of this is taken with a grain of salt because this is women's health. We don't have much data. But to our knowledge, the first hormone that starts to decline when you're going into perimenopause is not estrogen and it's not progesterone. It's melatonin. So melatonin, which we know is like the hormone of sleep, is the first that starts its decline typically in your 30s. And then that's what triggers that elevation in FSH, and then eventually that disruption in ovulation, decline in progesterone, decline in estrogen. So those early symptoms of waking up in the morning, or even like anxiety, just like a disrupted circadian rhythm, is not something to ignore for sure. And many women choose to supplement melatonin for that reason, not just for sleep, but also as an ovarian health support. There's a lot of strong data on melatonin for ovulation in the fertility space, and now we're getting more and more data of how it could potentially help ovarian longevity, but obviously nothing interventional there yet. So that's a really exciting one to look at. I really would explore slow release melatonins, because many melatonins don't address the main problem that perimenopausal women start to experience, which is that they can sleep, but then they wake up.
Yes.
They can't access deep sleep. They can't stay asleep. So slow release melatonins that stay in your system are really what's going to help you get those hours.
In my 30s, I thought it was just because I was running wide open.
Like, or you had children, yes.
Kids and
lots
ball
on your
and
mind.
career and, all of the things. And I thought, I'm just running wide open. No wonder I'm exhausted. And then you get have you ever been so tired that like the tears are coming out of your eyes? And then you go to bed and you're like, hello, I want to think about everything right now. That kind of tired.
Yeah.
So, not knowing that that's a prerequisite for perimenopause. Just thought it was lifestyle.
Right.
It's challenging because life is not a randomly controlled trial.
No. Right.
Yeah, we have so many things influencing us. Like I know people who went through postpartum and peri at the same time. They don't know if they're if that triggered their, it's really challenging, the type of things people go through. And that's why I say this when we're developing our blogs as well, is if you're writing a blog on PCOS, you can't just write a blog on PCOS. You have to write a blog on PCOS. PCOS during the perimenopausal transition. Lean PCOS. Women's health is an overlap of a bunch of complicated conditions that in many cases were misnamed. So it's really important to look at these intersections, because what you described could very easily be dismissed as is the condition of parenthood, right? It also is associated with peri.
Yes. Yeah. And then so we've talked a lot about what the test is, why it's important, why is ovarian longevity important. We've talked a little bit about the markers and then what those could imply. Can we talk a little bit about intervention? Just what have you seen? Because when I looked at your test and looked at the clinical data around certain recommendations, what have you seen to be the most common intervention to prolong ovarian life?
Yeah, so now all of the interventions that we currently look at are things we've seen from either observational data or theoretically this should work. So in the fertility space, we have a lot of time to conceive data. So things that helped with ovulation, things that helped with biomarkers of conception sometimes, but also things that obviously helped with supporting natural pregnancy or assisted reproductive technologies. That's what majority of the space pulls from for this data. And that's where melatonin comes from, like that has really strong data for ovulation and ovulation support. There's strong reason to believe that that would also support ovarian health and maybe even ovarian longevity. So I would say melatonin. Another thing I would say is when we did like a retrospective analysis just with our model of KSM66 ashwagandha, which is a highly bioavailable form of the adaptogen, we found that there was actually a pause over a 3-month period in ovarian aging.
Wow.
So yeah, and we have strong reason like to believe based on the hormones that KSM66, that ashwagandha in general modifies, that there could be positive movement there. So I'd say ashwagandha is one to look at, but like obviously a good form of it. There are some general ovulation supports, like you got your inositols, right? You got your 40-to-1 ratio.
Yes.
Of those.
We use it all the time.
Yeah, yep. So really good for ovulation. And then I'd say mitochondrial support is really, really big. And that can be a CoQ10. In our report, CoQ10 pops up for basically every single hormone value because it has such strong data on influencing these hormones that are so closely tied to ovarian longevity. So a good CoQ10. And we're even like kicking off some research with some prenatal brands and nutraceutical brands. So if you know MitoQ, there's Parallel that like we would love to do some research on their products. WeNatal is a really good prenatal brand that has an egg support supplement. So there's a lot that we are also looking to explore independently with research to get that direct data to show that menopause can be delayed and we can promote ovarian longevity.
It's fascinating to me. Having now I'm on the other side of menopause, it would be great if I had this information, 10 years ago. So what do you foresee in the next 10 years? What are your hopes and wishes for this product that you've created? And, what would you like to see as the founder of this, the end result to be?
Well, we specifically designed this tool to not be something that is a standalone kit that some people who did the Google search could access. The whole point of women's health and the lack of education in women's health is the fact that no one knows the question to ask.
100%.
So it's not enough to answer the question. You have to get it out there. And that's why even though this tool is considered the gold standard now, we want it to be the new standard of care. It can integrate anywhere. It's a software. It's analyzing blood work doctors are already doing. The recommendation shouldn't be, which currently unfortunately is in many guidelines, it shouldn't be don't test blood and work off of symptoms. It should be test blood with analytics, test blood with interpretation.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's what we want to promote in this space so that women can actually start to make health decisions and physicians can help their patients make health decisions using this one missing piece of the puzzle as they put it into each and every specialty where we have the rest of the picture. It's just this one thing that has been one big part that has really suffered and led to women not knowing what's going wrong. So hopefully by solving that one piece, we can really make leaps and bounds in this space.
Well, I think that, this is just to me so incredibly fascinating that we still have new data coming out in the world of women's health and hormones. so much change has happened over the past, what would you say,
Few
5
months,
to 10 years, 5 to 10 years, even last few months.
Yeah, the last few months.
Yeah. I mean, all the time we're getting new data, new ways to improve our health, and things that we can proactively do to kind of move that needle forward for ourselves, but also for the next generation. So I'm honored that you would come and talk to us today about this, and just very thankful that you're willing to get the word out there. Any last thoughts, Mandy?
If someone wants to have this testing done, how do they find it? What questions do they ask of their practitioners? How do they get this information?
Yes. So, well, if you're a physician or you are a lab or a digital health, then the easiest way is to get in touch with us, and we will be able to license the tool to you. Mm-hmm. We make it very easy for partners. If you're a woman who's interested in getting these results for herself, then we have a wait list through our website where you can sign up. I would also say, if you want, you can ask your practitioner, to reach out to us, right? And tell them hey, I want this test, I want this information, I want this tool. And then we'd be happy to talk to them as well to get it to you sooner.
Can you share that website?
Yes, it's timelessbiotech.com.
Perfect.
Easy to remember. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was very interesting.
Yes. Thank you, Kiran. Thank you for just all the work that you've done. And then again, being willing to share that with the world and with us. Yeah.
Well, we're really excited to launch with you. So that'll definitely be very exciting for both you and your patients, I'm sure, and us. And yeah, we can start to gather some of the first interventional data in this space. So exciting times.
Love it. Love it. Thanks so much.